My name is Cordelia Sterling. I am 32 years old, and I have always been the outlier in a family built on legacy, reputation, and a certain kind of power that hangs in the air like expensive cologne. For the Sterlings of Boston, success is measured in generations, not years, and certainly not in lines of code or startup launches. From the time I could walk, my parents mapped out my life with the precision of a banker calculating risk. Sterling Prep, Wellesley, then a fast track to a vice presidency at Sterling Bancorp. There was never room for detours, especially not the kind that involved technology, innovation, or anything that smelled of Silicon Valley. Tonight, as I sat at the long mahogany table beneath a chandelier older than my grandfather, I heard the old family tune yet again. Unemployed again, Cordelia? The words slipped from my aunt's lips, each syllable as sharp as crystal. Around the table, eyes flickered with polite amusement or quiet contempt. I was used to this routine, being the Sterling who never quite fit, who traded tailored suits for turtlenecks, shareholder meetings for late-night code, and the family's approval for a private sense of purpose. But humiliation has a way of wearing grooves into your soul. What no one at that table knew was that everything was about to change. Before I could reply to the mockery, James, the family butler for as long as I can remember, entered the room holding a silver tray. On it rested the latest issue of Fortune magazine, fresh from the publisher. With a bow, he handed it to my father, its cover still hidden beneath a thick envelope. The air stilled. I could feel every eye, every breath, pause. In that moment, I was no longer just the family's disappointment. I was the secret they were about to discover. There is a particular kind of silence in old New England estates, a silence thick with expectation, where the walls remember everything. The Sterling home in Brookline is more than just a house. It's a monument to decades of banking deals, black-tie galas, and names whispered with respect in boardrooms from Boston to New York. Portraits of ancestors stare down from the walls, their eyes sharp, lips unsmiling, as if daring any descendant to fall short. Growing up, I was taught to measure myself not by my dreams, but by the standards set long before I was born. My father, Robert Sterling, is a man whose handshake closes mergers, and whose word reshapes the trajectory of family fortunes. His world is tailored in dark suits and quiet authority. My mother, Diana, is the architect of every family dinner, every press photo, every charitable gala. Her strength evident in the perfect angle of her smile, the crispness of her remarks. In the Sterling family, even affection is an act of discipline. Then there was Camilla, my cousin and childhood rival. 2 years older, polished in every way, she was the daughter my parents quietly wished they'd had. Camilla's life followed the Sterling blueprint: Ivy League, internships at the bank, networking at every family event. By the time she was 28, she was already a senior vice president, her name in industry newsletters, her photo with dignitaries framed in our hallway. I, meanwhile, was the creative one, a polite way of saying the disappointment. My victories, regional coding competitions, software projects that won state awards, were treated as charming distractions, not achievements. The message was always clear. The world needs more bankers, not more dreamers, my father would say, resting a heavy hand on my shoulder as if he could steady me by sheer will. When I was 12, I begged for my first laptop. I got a stack of finance textbooks instead. Any fascination with computers was met with gentle redirection. Focus on your future, darling. The real world won't wait for fantasies. Even the house seemed to conspire to keep me in line. The library, filled wall to wall with books, held not a single volume about technology. Family conversations danced around mergers, returns, and risk, never algorithms or code. The few times I tried to talk about what I was building, the room would go quiet. Then, inevitably, someone would pivot back to safer topics. In that house, love came with conditions. Approval was conditional on compliance. Every ambition that did not serve the family legacy was pruned before it could bloom. I learned early how to tuck my passions out of sight, to keep my real self hidden. But beneath all that careful obedience, the ember of rebellion never died. I left Boston under the pretense of pursuing a joint degree in finance and computer science, a compromise that appeased my parents. In truth, I'd already chosen my side. Stanford was my escape hatch, 3,000 miles from Brookline, and the suffocating expectations that seemed stitched into every fabric of my old life. My father's farewell was a brisk handshake and a reminder. Don't forget where you come from. My mother kissed my cheek and slipped a sterling silver pen into my bag, a relic engraved with the family crest. A reminder, I suppose, of the world I was supposed to serve. California was oxygen. The air was softer, conversations less loaded, and the pressure of legacy faded with every mile I put between myself and Boston. I threw myself into my coursework, spending late nights in the computer lab, drinking bad coffee, and chasing the thrill of making something out of nothing. I felt alive, dangerous, free in a way I never had before. I joined project teams, built apps with classmates who didn't care about last names, only results. In those first years, I started to believe my ambitions weren't delusions. But ambition is a double-edged thing. My first startup, a digital payment platform designed to help small businesses, drew in a few angel investors, and for a brief moment, hope bloomed. But I was naive. I ignored warnings about compliance and underestimated the complexity of financial regulation. Within a year, the venture collapsed under the weight of legal red tape and mounting debts. I emptied my savings trying to keep it afloat, and watched my dream unravel, line by agonizing line. I called home only once, desperate enough to hope for comfort. My father answered, his voice clipped. I warned you about chasing fads, Cordelia. Come home. Take the position at Sterling Bancorp. There's no shame in learning from failure, but there is in repeating it. My mother listened quietly on speaker, no doubt weighing the optics of my failure against the family's reputation. I hung up with the cold certainty that I was on my own. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I shared a cramped apartment with two strangers, worked night shifts at a data center to pay rent, and spent my free time hunched over a laptop, searching for what I'd missed, where I'd gone wrong. The glow of Silicon Valley felt a million miles away from the fluorescent lights of my reality. Yet, in those dark months, something hardened in me. Failure burned away my need for approval, stripped me down to the bone. What was left was a core I could finally recognize as my own. If I was going to rise, it would be on my terms, or not at all. The breakthrough, when it came, felt almost accidental, a flash in the dark, sharp enough to sting. It was a stormy Tuesday night in February. The rain battered the window of my tiny apartment, each drop echoing the anxiety that had settled in my chest. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, chasing freelance contracts by day and haunting coding forums by night, restless and raw from too many disappointments. The idea struck just before dawn. I was half awake, mindlessly scanning headlines about another major bank falling victim to a cyber attack. In my mind, I could see the gaps, the vulnerabilities I'd noticed for years in my father's world and in my own. These institutions, with all their history and power, still relied on outdated patchwork systems to guard fortunes. I realized, in that moment, that my curse was actually a rare kind of advantage. I knew both the world of the old guard and the language of the new. I saw the holes no one else was looking for. I scribbled down the beginnings of what would become VaultGuard, an AI-powered security platform designed not just to plug leaks, but to learn, evolve, and predict threats before they happened. For the first time since leaving Boston, my heart raced not with dread, but with something like hope. The code came quickly, lines flowing like water, a decade of suppressed ambition erupting in a single sleepless week. Building a team was a different challenge. I didn't want the pedigreed, polished faces from the Sterling world. I wanted survivors, misfits, people who knew what it meant to be underestimated. My first recruit was Maria, a self-taught coder who'd been rejected from every elite internship for not having the right connections. Then came Tony, a cybersecurity expert who'd left the corporate world after blowing the whistle on his own boss. Each of us, in our own way, had something to prove. We worked out of my living room, fueled by bad coffee and the kind of desperation that can turn strangers into family. My credit cards were maxed out by the time we had our first working prototype, but the risk felt clean, honest, mine alone to carry. When it was time to pitch to investors, I made a deliberate choice. I introduced myself as C.S. Clark, a nod to my own name, but vague enough to keep my family's shadow at bay. I wanted Vault Guard to be judged for what it was, not for who I was related to. At our first investor meeting, the room was small, but the questions were sharp. One venture capitalist, a woman who'd started as a hacker herself, listened, then leaned back and smiled. "You're building the kind of defense this industry is terrified to admit it needs." She wrote the check the next day. I signed the first deal with shaking hands, aware that this was not just a business decision. It was a line in the sand, a promise to myself that I would never return to the cage my family had built for me. Vault Guard took on a life of its own. With every contract signed, every client won, the distance between me and my old life widened. Our team moved out of my cramped apartment and into a battered sunlit office above a Chinese bakery in downtown San Francisco. The city was noisy and alive, full of grit and possibility. We worked long nights, surviving on takeout and adrenaline, debugging algorithms while the city slept. News of our results traveled fast. Vault Guard's technology stopped 2 attempted heists at a regional bank in the first month, and soon, the big names came calling. Institutions my father would have respected, now asking for the help of a nameless startup led by someone they'd never heard of. But there was no one to call, no one to share the victories with. I watched from afar as my cousin Camilla appeared in glossy magazines, celebrated for launching a new wealth management division at Sterling Bancorp. My mother sent the clippings in heavy, cream-colored envelopes, always accompanied by a handwritten note. "Hope you're finding your way, darling." Not once did she ask about my own work. Not once did anyone suspect that the headlines they ignored would soon belong to me. There were nights I stared out the window of our office, San Francisco lights smeared by coastal fog, and wondered if this was truly what I'd wanted. Success was supposed to be liberating. Instead, it was isolating, an endless balancing act between public obscurity and private achievement. I went to industry conferences only as C.S. Clark, letting my CTO accept the awards, ducking cameras, always one step removed from recognition. At family dinners, my role didn't change. I returned to Brookline as the daughter still finding herself. My father asked pointed questions about my job search. My mother pressed for details about any plans to move back east. Camilla offered well-meaning advice about how to leverage my tech hobby into a support role at the bank. I nodded, smiled, and let their words wash over me. Sometimes I'd catch my own reflection in the dining room's silverware, eyes tired, mouth set, shoulders drawn back against the tide of quiet disappointment. Yet, beneath that surface, I was changing. I became sharper, more strategic, learning how to deflect their doubts without letting them bruise me. The old ache for approval faded, replaced by a steely certainty that I was building something that mattered, even if no one at that table understood it yet. With every visit, I took mental notes. The way my father's hand trembled on his glass as he spoke about digital threats. How my mother's voice wavered when the news mentioned cyber attacks. They didn't realize that the very future they feared was already in their midst, quietly rewriting what it meant to be a Sterling. The night of the summer family dinner, the air inside the Sterling dining room was so thick it felt almost ceremonial. Silver gleamed beneath the chandelier, and the crystal glasses sparkled, waiting for another round of toasts. Conversation drifted from investment portfolios to Ivy League admissions, each relative taking their turn in the spotlight. When Camilla announced a new banking partnership, the applause was automatic, affectionate, expected. Then it was my turn. My aunt's smile was sharp, her voice syrupy with concern. "Still between jobs, Cordelia?" The question, casual to the rest of the table, landed like a stone. My mother offered a quick, nervous laugh. My father looked away, his disappointment barely hidden. I felt the old sting, but this time, it was cold and distant, almost amusing. Before I could answer, James, our family butler, entered with perfect timing. "Excuse me, sir," he said to my father, placing a large sealed envelope on the table. "A delivery, just arrived by courier. marked urgent. My father opened it absent-mindedly, only to freeze as the glossy cover slid into view. It was the latest issue of Fortune. My face filled the cover, sharp and unmistakable. The headline read, C.S. Clarke, the mind behind Vault Guard. The room fell utterly silent, every eye snapping between the magazine and me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Camilla stared, stunned, her voice lost. My father's knuckles whitened against the tablecloth. I met their gaze, steady and unflinching. Yes, that's me, I said, my voice clear, calm. I am Vault Guard, and everything you thought I'd failed at, I was just building alone. For a long electric moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Questions, disbelief, a flurry of voices all fighting to rewrite history. Camilla was first to recover, reaching for a thread of connection. You're the founder everyone's talking about? Why didn't you say anything? Her voice was both wounded and envious. My father's tone was sharper, layered with pride and accusation. Why hide this from us, Cordelia? Do you know what it means for our name? For the bank? My mother dabbed at her eyes, torn between pride and regret. All these years, I just wanted you to be safe. You did this all by yourself? I let their reactions wash over me. I needed to know I could, I answered simply. I didn't want my success to belong to the family or to the bank. I wanted it to belong to me. There was no apology in my voice, just truth. The dynamics shifted. Relatives who'd dismissed me now tried to claim kinship. An uncle made a clumsy pitch for partnership. Camilla's congratulations were laced with subtle competitiveness. I saw it all and stayed still, grounded. As dessert arrived, untouched by most, my father finally spoke with something softer in his eyes. Maybe you were right to break away. He hesitated, as if seeing me for the first time. Maybe the future belongs to those who dare to leave the room. I didn't answer. I just smiled, steady, at last in my own skin. That night, after the house emptied of voices and old grievances, I slipped out into the garden, drawn by the scent of wet earth and blooming roses. It was a place of secrets and solace, the one corner of the Sterling estate, where I could breathe without feeling measured. I sat on the rim of the fountain, letting the silence ease some of the tension in my chest, my fingers tracing patterns in the cool stone. A moment later, I heard my father's footsteps. He didn't call my name, just settled on the bench beside me. For once, he looked older, less the commanding banker, more a man grappling with the shifting ground beneath his feet. I always believed legacy meant holding on, he began, voice rough. But tonight, I saw you build something new, outside everything I ever imagined. His admission, spoken in the hush of midnight, was both apology and benediction. I met his gaze. I never meant to turn my back on the family. I just couldn't keep shrinking myself to fit someone else's mold. Vault Guard was how I saved myself when everything else fell away. My words landed soft but certain, as true for me now as they'd ever been. He took a long breath, his hands folded. Your mother and I thought we were protecting you, but maybe we were really protecting our idea of what you should be. I'm sorry, Cordelia, for all the ways we tried to make you choose safety over yourself. A tightness I'd carried for years began to ease. You gave me strong roots, Dad, but the rest, I had to figure out on my own. I think legacy isn't just about what we keep. It's about what we have the courage to change. We sat for a while, the fountain's trickle filling the silence. When he reached out and squeezed my hand, it wasn't approval I felt, but acceptance, a rare, quiet freedom. A week later, my parents visited Vault Guard's San Francisco office. My mother watched the global security dashboard in awe, her pride shining through questions and laughter. For the first time, she saw the world I'd built not as rebellion, but as legacy too. At our next family gathering, Camilla raised a toast, this time not to tradition, but to those bold enough to chart a new course. The room echoed with applause, genuine and warm. As night fell and the lights of Boston flickered outside, I realized my story had become more than an act of defiance. It was a doorway. Others would walk through after me, less afraid. I had finally become both daughter and founder, whole on my own terms, In the house that once tried to contain me,